I should have known something terrible was coming when the old grandfather clock in my hallway stopped ticking at exactly 11:47 p.m. That clock had been running for 60 years, through births and deaths, celebrations and sorrows. It had never stopped before. But there I was, lying in my narrow bed, listening to the sudden, unnatural silence that filled my small house like water filling a drowning man's lungs. The kind of silence that makes your skin crawl and your heart race, even when you don't know why. That's when I heard the voices. At first, I thought I was dreaming. The words drifted through the thin walls like smoke, carrying a weight that made my chest tighten with dread. My son David and his wife Rebecca, whispering in the kitchen below my bedroom, their voices sharp with the kind of urgency that only comes in the dead of night when people think they're safe from listening ears. I held my breath, every instinct telling me to cover my ears, to sink back into the safety of sleep and pretend I hadn't heard anything. But 78 years of living had taught me that the most dangerous truths always revealed themselves in darkness. I can't do this anymore, Rebecca. David's voice carried through the floorboards, and I could hear him pacing, back and forth, the way he used to when he was 7 years old and had broken something precious. She's getting worse every day. Yesterday she left the stove on for 3 hours. 3 hours, Rebecca. She could have burned the house down with Emma inside. My hands clutched the worn quilt that had covered this bed since 1965, the same quilt I'd sewn with my own fingers while waiting for my husband Robert to come home from Vietnam. Had I really left the stove on? The memory felt slippery, like trying to hold water in cupped hands. But David, she's your mother, Rebecca started, but he cut her off. She's becoming dangerous. His voice was cold, clinical, like he was discussing a broken appliance rather than the woman who had given him life. Last week she forgot Emma's name for almost an hour. She just stood there, staring at her own granddaughter like she was a stranger. The words hit me like physical blows. Emma's name, my bright, beautiful Emma with her red curls and green eyes that reminded me so much of myself at that age. Had I really forgotten? The thought terrified me more than the storm building outside. I've already looked into places, David continued, and I could hear papers rustling. Sunset Manor has good reviews, and they have financial assistance programs for people like us. I'm going to call them tomorrow and start the paperwork. People like us. As if I were already gone, already erased from their lives like chalk from a blackboard. You mean, send her away? Rebecca's voice was small, uncertain. Even she, who had never warmed to me in 15 years of marriage, seemed shocked by the coldness of it. It's not sending her away, David snapped. It's getting her the care she needs. Professional care. This house is falling apart anyway, the roof leaks, the pipes are ancient, and I can't afford to maintain 2 properties. Once she's settled somewhere safe, we can sell this place and use the money for Emma's college fund. My heart stopped. Sell my house. The house where I'd brought David home as a baby, where I'd nursed him through pneumonia, where I'd waited through countless nights for Robert to return from war. The house where I'd buried my secrets so deep I thought they'd never surface. Thunder crashed overhead, and the first drops of rain began hammering against my bedroom window like urgent fingers tapping for attention. In that moment, I understood that the storm wasn't just in the sky, it was in my house, in my family, in the very foundations of everything I'd spent a lifetime building. But storms, I've learned, have a way of washing away more than just the surface. Sometimes they uncover things that were meant to stay buried. As I lay there in the darkness, listening to my son plan my exile with the same detachment he might use to plan a grocery list, something began to stir in my chest. Not just hurt or betrayal, those were familiar companions by now. This was something else, something I hadn't felt in decades. It was the memory of who I used to be, before I became just David's mother or Emma's grandmother. Before I learned to make myself small and quiet and grateful for whatever scraps of attention my family threw my way. I was Martha Eleanor Hayes, and I had survived things that would have broken lesser women. I had secrets that could shatter this family's carefully constructed life, truths that had been buried for 43 years under layers of sacrifice and silence. The storm grew stronger, and somewhere in the howling wind, I heard an echo of my younger self, the girl who had faced down poverty and prejudice, who had fought for every scrap of happiness she'd ever known, who had made choices that still haunted her dreams. That girl was still inside me, waiting. And as I listened to my son reduce my entire existence to a problem that needed solving, I made a decision that would change everything. It was time to tell the truth. I didn't sleep after that. How could I? Instead, I lay in my bed watching the storm rage outside my window, feeling something awakening in my bones that I'd thought was long dead. By morning, the house felt different. The silence was heavier, loaded with unspoken words and approaching confrontations. When I finally made my way downstairs, my joints protesting every step, I found David at the kitchen table with his laptop open and a stack of brochures spread before him like tarot cards predicting my future. "Morning, Mom," he said without looking up, his voice carefully neutral. "Sleep okay?" I poured myself coffee with hands that trembled slightly, though whether from age or rage, I couldn't say. About as well as you'd expect for someone whose son is planning to ship her off to strangers. David's head snapped up, his face flushing red. "Mom, I don't know what you think you heard." "I heard every word," I said quietly, settling into my chair across from him. "Sunset Manor. Financial assistance. Selling my house. Did I miss anything, or was that the complete assassination of my life?" For a moment, he looked exactly like he had at 7 years old when I'd caught him stealing cookies, guilty, defensive, and searching for any excuse that might get him out of trouble. "You weren't supposed to," he started. "What? I wasn't supposed to hear my own son discussing my future like I'm already dead?" I took a sip of my coffee, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Tell me, David, when exactly did I stop being a person and become a problem?" Rebecca appeared in the doorway, Emma trailing behind her with her backpack ready for school. My granddaughter's green eyes darted between her parents and me, already sensing the tension that crackled through the air like electricity. "Grandma Martha, are you okay?" Emma asked, dropping her backpack and coming to stand beside my chair. I reached out and smoothed her red curls, the same gesture I'd made 1,000 times before. But this time, I held her gaze and let her see the truth in my eyes. "I'm fine, sweetheart. But there are some things your parents and I need to discuss. Some things about our family that it's time for you to know." "Mom, don't drag Emma into this," David warned, standing up so quickly his chair scraped against the linoleum. "She's just a child." "She's old enough to understand betrayal," I replied, still stroking Emma's hair. "Aren't you, honey? Old enough to know when someone you love is being thrown away like garbage?" "That's enough." David's voice cracked like a whip. "You're being dramatic and unfair. This isn't about throwing you away, it's about getting you proper care." I laughed then, a sound so bitter it surprised even me. "Proper care? David, I raised you in this house when we had nothing. I worked double shifts at the diner to pay for your clothes and your food and your dreams. I sold everything I owned when you got sick, and I never asked for anything in return except to be allowed to live out my days in the home I've loved for over 50 years. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably by the door. "Martha, we're not trying to hurt you. But you have to understand our position." "Your position?" I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 78 years in my creaking joints, but also feeling something else, a strength I'd forgotten I possessed. "Let me tell you about positions, Rebecca. Let me tell you about the position I was in when I was 19 years old, pregnant, and alone because the man I loved was bleeding out in a jungle on the other side of the world." Emma's eyes grew wide, and even David fell silent. "Let me tell you about the position I was in when the doctor told me my baby, your father, might not survive because I couldn't afford the medicine he needed. Or the position I was in when I had to choose between keeping my wedding ring and keeping my child alive." I moved toward the window, looking out at the storm damage in my small backyard. The old oak tree that Robert had planted the day David was born had lost a major branch in the night, but its trunk still stood strong and defiant. "You want to talk about positions?" I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "Then let me tell you about the position I've been in for 43 years, keeping secrets that would destroy this family's precious peace of mind. Secrets about why your father never came home, David. Secrets about the choices I made and the prices I paid so you could have the comfortable life you're so eager to protect. The kitchen fell silent except for the steady drip of water from a loose shutter outside and the soft ticking of the old clock on the wall. What secrets? Emma whispered, her small hand finding mine. I looked down at my granddaughter, this beautiful child who might be the only person in this family who still loved me unconditionally, and made a decision that had been 43 years in the making. Sit down, I said to David and Rebecca. All of you. Because before you pack me off to some institutional tomb, you're going to hear the truth about this family. The whole truth. Thunder rumbled overhead, though the worst of the storm had passed. But I knew that the real storm, the one that had been building in my heart for decades, was just beginning. And unlike the weather outside, this storm would change everything. David's face had turned the color of old paper, but his jaw was set in that stubborn line I remembered from his teenage years. Mom, whatever you think you need to tell us, it can wait. Emma needs to get to school, and I have a meeting with the people at Sunset Manor in 2 hours. No. The word came out sharper than I'd intended, carrying decades of suppressed authority. Emma stays. She's part of this family, and she deserves to know what kind of people she comes from before you teach her that abandoning the elderly is acceptable behavior. Rebecca stepped forward, her manicured hands clenched into fists. Martha, you're being manipulative. Using a child to... To what? Tell the truth? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Funny how the truth becomes manipulation when it's inconvenient. That's when David crossed the line he could never uncross. You know what, Mom? You're right. Let's talk about truth. His voice turned cruel, calculated. Let's talk about how you've been living in a fantasy world, clinging to this rotting house like it's some kind of shrine. Let's talk about how you wander around at night, talking to pictures of a dead man who's been gone for 40 years. Emma gasped, but David wasn't finished. Let's talk about how last month, Mrs. Peterson found you in her backyard at 3 a.m, confused and calling for someone named Johnny. Or how the mailman told me you've been leaving food on the porch for cats that died years ago. Each word hit like a slap, and I felt something crumbling inside me. Not my resolve, that was growing stronger by the minute, but the last of my illusions about the son I'd raised. Let's talk about truth, Mom, David continued, his voice rising with each sentence. The truth is you're sick. The truth is this house is falling apart around you, and you're too stubborn to admit it. The truth is we can't afford to keep enabling your delusions while our own daughter watches her grandmother slowly lose her mind. The kitchen fell deadly silent. Even Emma seemed frozen, her green eyes wide with shock at her father's cruelty. But then something extraordinary happened. The lights flickered. Not the gentle flutter of old wiring, but a sharp, deliberate strobe that made us all look up at the ceiling fixture. The fluorescent bulb hummed ominously, then blazed so bright it hurt our eyes before settling back to normal. That's odd, Rebecca murmured, but I knew it wasn't odd at all. Because at that exact moment, I felt him. Robert. My Robert, dead these 43 years, but suddenly as present in this room as the day he'd kissed me goodbye at the train station. The air grew cold, and I could smell his cologne, Old Spice and cigarettes and something indefinably masculine that had always made me feel safe. David, oblivious to the change in the room's atmosphere, pressed on with his attack. And while we're being honest, let's talk about money. Do you have any idea how much it costs to maintain this place? The new roof alone would be $15,000. The plumbing is shot, the foundation is cracking, and the electrical work would cost more than our mortgage payment. We've been subsidizing your little fantasy for years, Mom, and we can't do it anymore. The temperature in the room dropped another 10 degrees. David, I said quietly, my voice carrying a warning he was too angry to hear. You might want to stop talking now. Why? Because you'll tell us another one of your stories about the good old days? Because you'll guilt-trip us with more tales about your sacrifices? He was pacing now, his face flushed with a righteous anger that made him look like a stranger. The sacrifices were decades ago, Mom. They don't give you a free pass to destroy our financial future and traumatize our daughter with your increasingly bizarre behavior. That's when the kitchen window exploded.